Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Andira Schroeder. I'm the head of marketing for Link3D, and we're excited to help sponsor this game day event today. Before we jump into the panel, I just wanted to review some of the technical best practices for this Remo platform that we're using today. So Remo tends to work best on a computer rather than a smartphone or a tablet, and Google Chrome tends to be the best browser as well. If you are having connection issues, first try refreshing the page, but we've also found that sometimes a VPN may block access as well. So you may have to either disable that or try using a personal computer instead. I'm also happy to help anyone get connected if you're having trouble. So you can message me in the of Remo by searching for my name, and I can help get you connected there as well. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'd like to welcome John Wilsinski now from America Makes. John, are you able to turn on your camera and mic?
I am. Got it. Yeah, fifth time's a charm. So, thank you, Andera. So, hello everyone. Welcome to a game day. So, we're really excited to be talking about this topic today. We've hosted 3 of these now on very different topics. We talked through the impact that additive manufacturing has had and the role that it played in the COVID response. We explored the space of additive manufacturing supply chain. What does it mean for distributed manufacturing? And most recently, we talked through the economics and the opportunities associated with design for additive manufacturing. So today, I'm really excited to be talking and bringing this next topic to the community. We were able to pull together a really interesting cross-section of experts that represent a wide variety of industries, from automotive to medical to energy and a number of others. And what we're going to be talking through today is something that we're all wondering about, and that is, what is the future of additive manufacturing? We all understand that where we're at today in 3D printing or additive manufacturing is very different than what it looked like a couple of years ago, let alone 8 years ago when our institute got started as a public-private partnership. Things have changed dramatically, but that's all kind of in the past at this point, and we've made significant advancements. But we're at the point right now where we're really looking to answer the question of where are we going and how are we going to get there. And ultimately, what does additive manufacturing look like 5 years from now, let alone what does it look like 10 years from now? So we're going to be exploring a number of different discussion points over the course of the next 90 minutes or so, talking about challenges and opportunities within this space. What are we really facing as major challenges in the technology today? What do we see as trends in the near term and really the midterm? And where do we think, or which maybe is the better way of putting that, industries do we think will ultimately benefit most from additive manufacturing and ultimately the adoption of additive manufacturing? With that, there's tremendous opportunities. There's challenges, but with that are, again, really important opportunities to think about. And what we're trying to better understand, and really what we feel our role is to look at, how can we as a public-private partnership be part of accelerating the development of these technologies and ultimately the adoption of additive manufacturing? If you're thinking about the future, you can't really ignore emerging technologies. So, what role do emerging technologies play here? What are those technologies that are just coming out or potentially still in the basic research stages that will ultimately have an impact on us and our industries as we move forward? So those are just a few of the different things that we're going to be exploring over the course of the game day event. Really excited to be covering this topic. One final kind of closing note. Like to thank the team at Link3D and Terry for pulling all of this together, helping us get this organized, putting on this event and really getting the platform built up and coordinated for us. With that, I would like to offer, if there's folks out there in membership who are interested in being part of the future, future events with the Institute, or even if you have ideas about things that we want to cover in these various events that we put on, we have a variety of different medium that we use. Please reach out to us. So Tara Sarver is really the mastermind and the coordinator from the America Make side, who is organizing all of our events at the Institute. So reach out to her. She's easy to get access to. She's very active in these meetings as well. Andy Resnick is our communications director. If you have any thoughts there, or obviously reach out to me if there's things that you want to cover. We're ultimately trying to make sure we're delivering content that is valuable to you. So please reach out if you have thoughts, if there's things that we're missing the mark, or maybe most importantly, things that we're not covering right now. We're really interested in getting your feedback there. So that's really all I wanted to cover today. I'd like to introduce Terry. He's going to take it from here. Get the panel brought up on stage and really transition into covering some of these, really important topics that are facing us as we look to where are we going? What is this technology years from now? So, morning, Terry. Hand it over to you, sir.
Good morning, John, or good afternoon, I guess it is on the East Coast, Eastern time zone. Yeah, thanks, John, for the opening comments and for the introduction. Much appreciated. So as John mentioned, this is the 4th game day and our final in the series. And so we're very excited about it. It truly is a game day with the NFL kicking off later today, Texans versus the Chiefs. So we can enjoy some professional football. And I'd like to say, to start with, is that the near-term future of additive manufacturing has encountered a bump in the road, and that's the pandemic, creating a lot of uncertainty. But we'll get through it. I'm absolutely certain, much like the downturns in the 2008, 2009 timeframe, and then back even worse in 2001, 2002. And those are the only 2 times in additive manufacturing's history with negative growth. Counting back to 1987, 88 timeframe. We'll get through it, and even with the pandemic, interest in additive manufacturing remains very high. The future is bright. And most interesting to me, and I think many of you, is the adoption of the technology for production quantities. We've had more than 3 decades to figure out how to use it for making models and prototype parts and some forms of tooling such as jigs and fixtures. But the next frontier really is using it to manufacture not only little widgets and small things, but flight hardware, consumer products, all kinds of really interesting products that add value. And that's what's exciting to me. As John mentioned, we face a lot of challenges as an industry, and we'll talk about some of those. But whenever you have challenges and problems to solve, new products and services come about to meet those needs. So I'm excited to spend the next 90 minutes with you discussing the future of additive manufacturing with 5 top experts and high achievers, and I truly mean that. We have people from each major industrial sector. If you haven't noticed, we have people from power energy, automotive, consumer products, medical and healthcare, and then aerospace and defense. So with that, I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Junki, if she would be willing to please say a few words about yourself. Junki?
Sure. So I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yep. Great. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited and happy to be here. One of the reasons for that is we get sucked into this monotony of communicating with the same group of people every day. But so I'm happy and refreshingly happy to see different faces from different parts of the world and industry. And so, yeah, happy to be here. My name is Anjani Achanta. I lead the additive manufacturing technology and operations efforts within Baker Hughes, which is an energy technology company. And we're based out of Houston, Texas. We have locations and sites all over the world, and now multiple sites that are focusing heavily on how to drive the adoption and application of additive. So we've been on this journey over started 5 years ago with experimenting with different things. Of course, rapid prototyping of non-metal has been longer than that, but focusing on metal parts for downhole or end-use application has started about 4 to 5 years ago. And so today we have come a long way. We have multiple parts that are in production, some downhole, but end-use parts. For us, there is a lot of benefit in driving additive, and we realized very soon that it's not something that you can accelerate by adopting the usual practices that you do in product development and technology transition. So we have taken the approach of focusing on additive as a very special initiative that has advantages across our supply chain, our product development, multiple areas within our organization. So that's what my group is charged to drive, and I'm super happy to be doing this. My excitement hasn't dropped since when I've started. And the first time I got into additive, somebody asked me to do this, and I said, does it work? So today I'm on the other extreme of that spectrum, telling people, showing examples, coaching people, but really driving that organically within our organization.
Great.
My background is in mechanical engineering. I've been in this industry for about 14 years and 18 years overall. So yeah, that's me. Thank you for inviting me here today.
Thanks, Anjuki. We'll do this alphabetically by last name. So Ellen, if you would say a few things.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is really exciting to me. I think these public-private partnerships are essential for us to get together and share best practices and learn from one another to help to accelerate the adoption of additive manufacturing across all of our industries. These are really great events that I'm really excited to be a part of. So my name is Owen Lee. I'm the technical leader for additive manufacturing within our research and advanced engineering organization at Ford Motor Company. So in this role, I help to develop the technical roadmap and the strategy that we need in order to leverage the benefits of additive manufacturing across the entire enterprise. So we've already seen how additive manufacturing has significantly changed the way that we approach new product design through prototyping, visual models, fit and finish, and so forth. And we continue to push the envelope in that regard. And more recently, we have seen a lot of good successes using additive manufacturing on the factory floor. So tooling, jigs and fixtures, as Anjani already mentioned, is already starting to get traction and be migrated across many of our factories globally. But as part of the research organization, I have more of a luxury to take a further look into the future of what additive manufacturing can do for our company. And so, as has already been mentioned, what we're really trying to focus on is how do we productionize additive manufacturing, especially for automotive, where we have concerns about scalability, both relatively large parts, but also very high volumes of parts that need to have very high durability and performance for our products. So although, as I mentioned, we've been using additive manufacturing for decades to support prototyping, it was only about 6 years ago that I started our dedicated research program in additive manufacturing. And this has been really focused on how to address some of the key technology gaps that we still see that prevent us from using it more widespread across the company. So my background is in chemical engineering in polymeric systems, although we do have a huge effort in additive manufacturing on the polymer technology side. We also are quite active on metal additive manufacturing as well. I've been in the automotive industry for 22 years now. Most of that has been focused on some of the conventional technologies. And so really understanding how to translate some of these new technologies into and integrated into our workflow and our processes is quite important. So the thing that I think we really need to focus on in our approach of adapting additive manufacturing is to remember that it is just one more tool in our toolbox, and it needs to be well integrated into some of the other processes that we use today. So thank you. I'm looking forward to a really good discussion today.
Thanks, Ellen. You've probably heard of Ford and Baker Hughes, Mayo Clinic, and of course Boeing, but maybe you haven't heard of Wiivv. I met Shamil, I believe it was in Korea, 2 years ago or so, and fascinating story. And so, Shamil?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I got to say it's really great because when I first heard about you and your report, I was at Hewlett Packard working on Let's Get 3D Printing Going, and it was like the only person who was an expert was Terry. So you've kind of grown a group of people and given them a voice to try and help this ecosystem grow, and I really credit you for that. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. I could say that I drank the Kool-Aid in about 2012 when I was at HP and staked my whole career in trying to get us to go move in that direction at Hewlett Packard, which felt like it was our birthright. But Wiivv was a company that I conceived of with a friend when we realized what's really missing in the industry is people applying the technology, not just building out new materials and new printers. And so we conceived of an integrated way to go from a smartphone to a custom 3D printed insole here. You can sort of see that. And it has your name on it, and we use MJF today to get the product made. We've shipped over 60,000 plus units to customers, and we raised about $15 million in different forms of capital. I'm actually need to do a little disclaimer. I personally just sold my majority stake in the company, and it's an exciting time. A new group in the Pacific Northwest will be taken over, and we'll be sharing more about that pretty soon. But I'll remain on as a board. So anything I speak from a Wiivv perspective is not as management today. I just want to make that very clear for everybody. But what I think I would offer to this dialogue and discussion is it is possible to scale with 3D. In fact, if anything, the message you'll hear from me probably multiple times today is what's lacking, in my view, is enough focus on actually growing the industries. I think there's been a lot of money going into the technologies, but not enough into actually what does it take to build companies and brands, and in some cases D2C brands around this. And I'll end with a small anecdote, and I'm sure we'll have more chance to discuss this. But I was just advising another startup today that's in the sort of medical dental space, and they are actually at the point where they've got a product in mind, and the decision to go metal 3D printing actually makes more sense than trying to get a metal product made abroad, largely because of COVID, distribution times, even the prototyping phase. But they're saying even to prove and validate their market, they're seeing 3D as a way to not go and cut big tools. So I view this as if the market drives I want to see if there's adoption and there's brands building this around it, I think the technology will catch up. And I want everyone to start thinking it from that lens. But we'll continue this conversation there.
All right. Thanks, Shamil. Dr. Morris.
Yeah, I have to forgive my appearance. I'm working in the hospital, which is exactly where our 3D printing happens. So I'm a medical director of the anatomic modeling unit at Mayo Clinic. We've been 3D printing on site in the hospital system for about 15 years. I started in 2001 at NIH by chance in the Office of High Performance Computing when I was still in medical school, and came to Mayo in 2002. And then we started 3D printing different really complex congenital cases. So what we do is, in medicine, there are multiple types of additive manufacturing that's used, from things like Stryker, for example, which is manufacturing acetabular cups and tibial plates and off-the-shelf products that are not necessarily personalized. Then there's personalized additive manufacturing that occurs both in metals and polymers. And then there's kind of what we do. So over the last 15 years, we've created a ecosystem, which is now called point of care manufacturing, which is essentially manufacturing everything we can at the point of care. And Terry had asked if we brought a couple doodads to show. So examples like if we have to reconstruct like your aorta, which is the biggest vessel in your body, well, we take your imaging and go to patient-specific simulation and built an entire field of stents with a company called Cook, all based on patient-specific simulation on patient-matched models that are, this is Stratasys print because we need it to be flexible on the inside. We do a whole lot of work with taking parts of you out and then putting other parts of you in places that you probably don't want to. So, for example, if you have a large cancer in your mouth and we're going to take half your mouth out like this, well, we print sterilizable class 2 medical devices like this that will go on your leg bone like this. And then all of these cuts are all predefined in something called virtual surgical planning, which we didn't invent, but to create an ecosystem, much like Shamil was talking, to allow us to go from a CT scan all the way through a manufactured device. Particularly yesterday, we did it for a really complex shoulder surgery, and we did that within 2 days. So we went from a scan to a medical device to the OR right now within 2 days using sterilizable printers and sterilizable ecosystems. So we do babies' faces, adult faces and brains. I mean, you name it, we're doing it for additive manufacturing in the hospital. And that's everything up and before titanium. So we've built the regulatory infrastructure with the FDA over the last 5 years to allow this to happen. We've built ecosystems around the software that allows this to happen. And more importantly, we've worked with the American Medical Association to make this reimbursable. Because if it is going to be standard of care at most hospital systems in the country, which has been spreading, then it has to be reimbursable. It has to be all part of the standard ecosystem. So we've built an entire IT ecosystem around going from you seeing your doctor to where we're doing 2,000 models for 852 patients a year at Mayo Clinic, Rochester. And then we're doing satellite printing in Florida, Arizona, throughout the health system. So we actually have files designed here, printed somewhere else, and we have to build regulatory infrastructures around all that. So we're pretty focused on the patient. We're not a company, although corporate ecosystems are growing around this. We're more concerned about taking care of you as a patient, and what additive manufacturing brings to bear on you is dramatic. I mean, we did a case yesterday with a thoracic surgeon. They have all the imaging you can imagine, CT, MRI, x-rays, angiograms, and we put this little model in his hand. It looks something like one of these. There's a little kid's chest with a really big tumor about the size of an apple in his chest. And within 5 seconds, he said, oh, I can't go from the front. I have to readjust. I have to move to the side. So about 20% of the time that happens, we're a really experienced Mayo Clinic surgeon who is going to do a standard approach, changes his mind, and you'd rather that happen before you go in the operative room. So a lot of the surgical guides and things we do, it's not that they're not available on the market. They are, but we have declining reimbursements, which is probably shocking to this community. And we have to operate within those constraints. So if we do things in-house for like craniomaxillofacial reconstruction, we can save 2 hours in the OR, which is sometimes $80 to $100 a minute for the entire staff. So it's incredible cost savings. We can do it faster. We have more collaboration because we have actual engineers part of the clinical team. So engineers in the OR, engineers meeting with the surgeons on a daily basis in the hospital. So we're right now sitting 4 flights above the ORs, and they go up and down between cases, and we send products up and down. And the future is bright for medical, both for standard parts that you're going to make using additive, but the field of point of care manufacturing continues to expand every year by every metric. And I think the future is really bright.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Morse. Absolutely fascinating work. Thank you for what you're doing there at Mayo Clinic. Melissa is a PhD at Boeing. I've followed her work since, oh goodness, maybe close to 20 years, maybe longer.
Yeah,
longer. So, Melissa?
Yeah, well, thank you, Terry, for inviting me. So my name's Melissa Orm, and I'm the Vice President of Boeing Additive Manufacturing, which we call BAM. And if you're a member of that, you're a member of the BAMily. That's our little joke, but anyway. So career path has been diverse and somewhat unusual. I began in academia, and I rose to full professor. And in that capacity, I developed several methods of what we called at the time net form manufacturing or solid freeform fabrication. And if you're old enough like Terry and I, you know what that is. It's basically the predecessor of additive manufacturing. And so later I became involved in a startup. I left academia and became involved in a startup called Morph3D. And that is a company that is focused on metal powder bed technology for applications specifically for the aerospace industry. And so in that capacity, I was the chief technology officer. And we really established the process flow and the manufacturing flow that can drive the traceability that is required for the aerospace industry. And we became qualified suppliers for Boeing hardware, as well as several other industries. And in that capacity, I was asked to join Boeing as vice president for additive manufacturing. And so at Boeing, in this capacity, I'm able to set the strategy for Boeing additive manufacturing. And what we're really focusing on is the high value aspects of additive manufacturing. We're on incorporating everything we do into the digital thread. So our value chain, which begins at concept of the part to monitoring and service, and everything that goes in between, from CAD file generation, simulations, building, sensor data, testing, everything that goes along, we're collecting data, right? And weaving that into the digital thread so that we have that traceability and so that we can drive scale. Boeing does have a lot of history in additive manufacturing, several decades of parts in aircraft. Many of the earliest ones are polymer parts, but we also have metal parts in civil aircraft, many from tie wire, and we have metal powder bed parts in satellites and rotorcraft. So we do see really huge advantages in additive for certain applications. And what we're trying to focus on is going away from the mindset of I can use additive to make this one part better, which you can, but really using additive to make the vehicle better, right? And so the value is not necessarily that I made this part 30% lighter, is that I've enabled a vehicle design that wasn't possible otherwise. And that's discriminating from any other vehicle that exists, and it's only possible with additive. And so this is where we see our future, and this is where we're really moving toward.
Thank you, Melissa. For years, Airbus had someone at the vice president level leading additive manufacturing at the company, and now Boeing does. So that's great to see. So thank you for all of your comments. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this important panel. The next, whatever's remaining now, about 1 hour, will all be Q&A. So I urge those who are attending this to ask any question you like. We'll do our very best to get to your questions, and you can rank. If you see a question that you like, you can vote for it, and it'll go to the top of the queue. So you can review them yourselves and vote. So please ask questions, and you're welcome to offer comments as well. I'm going to start with some questions that, at least a couple of that we had prepared. The first one is going to be directed to Ellen at Ford. And so, Ellen, this is a question. Experts in the auto industry expected significant traction toward broad adoption of additive manufacturing within about 3 or 4 years. Now, that was said 7 years ago. 7 years ago, about. But it largely has not occurred, except for some tooling applications. But as far as some of your mainstream cars, most parts are still made conventionally. What is preventing broad adoption in the automobile industry? And when do you expect it to occur in a much bigger way? Make your mute. Yeah.
Well, way to put me on the spot.
Yeah, no.
It turns out it's much harder than we thought to get it into scaled production in automotive. So I think the biggest hurdle for us, at least in automotive, is that our production scale is quite large, right? So in our initial stages in implementation for production, we need to focus more on some of the low volume applications. Furthermore, to kind of build on what Melissa said about how we best manufacturing to production, it's not how you make that part better, but how you can really leverage the benefits to attack the pain points to come up with a solution that could not be done with any other technology or material. So I think that part of the hurdle is that identifying exactly what those pain points are. Too often, I think the misconception from our current workforce is that additive it'll replace a conventional technology, and you can use an additive material to replace a conventional material. So there's this kind of one-by-one replacement that is often kind of the approach, and that is almost never going to win. You have some cases where it will work, but by and large, where you can have more broad adoption of the technologies is by looking at where the benefits of additive manufacturing, namely the complexity that it can provide, and some of the design freedoms, can be applied to make something from a holistic approach, from a systems level, something that would give you the best performance that it can give you. So it turns out that all of these things, like the process, the material, the digital workflow, the software, the design understanding and guidelines, all work very hand in hand. And it takes time for us to be able to get all the experts in all those areas and the supply chain and value chain together to attack it. So I think we're making progress and we're learning along the way. So I think we will continue to see more and more adoption. But I think it was very optimistic for us to think that it would happen in 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I bought into the idea. I mean, things were rocking and rolling back then, and they still are, except for this little bump in the road that we're encountering this year. But yeah, so when do you think, Alan, that we can see a bigger adoption for parts going on to mainstream cars?
We already are seeing some in kind of medium volume applications. So that's one of the other kind of challenging things about the automotive industry. And when we talk about low volume, it can range from 1 for some of the performance vehicles and race cars to even, I would say, about 70,000 units is low volume for us. And so we continue to say that we're really looking at low volume applications for additive, but we have seen success already today, and we continue to see that moving forward, building upon that in the automotive industry. So you already see it. It's just it just is growing and migrating.
Sure. Well, thanks, Alan. Shamil, the opportunity for custom consumer products, product manufacturing by additive manufacturing, I think is vast, and I hope many of you agree. Several custom eyewear and footwear products have been commercialized, but they're not yet really mainstream, at least not in my view. What will it take to drive down cost and improve efficiencies associated with these types of products?
Yeah. I don't, Tara, I would say I think cost is part of the equation, but I don't view it as the #1 problem. I know that's the prevailing theory in the industry, but I'll just give you sort of an example here, right? So when our product we've done, we've had to invest just as much in getting the experience right. You got to get the whole consumer product ready for prime time. And what has been a bit lacking has been this understanding of, it's the same theme of, how are you changing these products versus just replacing the way you do this. And so in our case, it had to be custom or personal before you could start saying we're going to change how the insole market works. Because to do a 3D printed insole versus an injection molded insole, this just doesn't make any sense economically today. So the cost part's true, but I think it's a lack of creativity that's what's caused the lack of adoption, if I'm being frank. And I think I'd summarize it in three things. I think the customer experience, that is something that needs to be invested in deeply. Two is these technologies, there's still a massive supply chain issue. More than a third of our cost is to do with, you get the thing printed somewhere, you get it shipped to somewhere, you get it assembled somewhere else, and you try to make it. And until there is, I guess, to borrow Dr. Morris's phrase, what you said, I think you called it make on site or make it, the idea, it's the same ideas. It's got to be done under one roof. As opposed to in multiple different places in order to produce these products. So supply chain inefficiency is driving the cost situation. But the third is, I think, just branding. We have, D2C. I'll give you an example. Our business at Wiivv nearly doubled in revenue during COVID in terms of our adoption on D2C. Now, some of our partnerships, we had to sort of take a second there, and everyone's kind of reevaluating the world. But all of a sudden, with retail closed, we're seeing record sales. And I think it had to do with, we had this relationship with customers already, and we had the ability to say, we're a brand out there. And most people didn't really care that it was 3D printed. They just wanted something that was made for them and that worked. So I guess just to frame it, ultimately, I think it boils down to the creativity element.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it's this question's for Anjuki. How can artificial intelligence and machine learning help industrialize additive manufacturing where current methods are falling short or are inadequate?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a topic close to us. So today what we're seeing is there's adoption in pockets, and you asked about barriers, right? So this is where this topic comes in. How do we ensure to our customer that processes are repeatable, that they're getting the utmost quality like they did before? How do they know that we're not adding any risk to the customer when they adopt a new technology that does X, Y, and Z better than the traditionally produced product? But what barrier we're facing is that they want to know that this unknown for them is not adding any new risk. So this is where we're trying to develop algorithms, use AI to make sure that when it comes to detecting defects, when it comes to looking at patterns that are not easily detectable by the hardware or the controls in the machines or our own QA QC protocols, that we develop algorithms by gathering data over the years on many, many cases to see if the machines can predict what's going to happen before it happens. So we have begun this. We are very nascent in our journey as far as what we plan to do. But yeah, we're developing some tools and techniques that will, for example, CT data, it was brought up earlier. We're not recreating parts, but we want to look at what a good part looks like, generally speaking, and compare a lot of data from good parts. And when you do a CT scan of a part that does have defects, what does that look like? How do we have to do destructive testing? No, hopefully not. So we're trying to develop some programs, algorithms to do that. And that's where we see the value. Yeah. And then just understanding the machines themselves too. Today we are facing a lot of, uncertainty in how the machines function, how they operate, what we can do with the machines. So we're not there yet, but at this point, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning algorithms are more towards our quality control aspect of additive manufacturing.
So, thank you. So is Baker Hughes having to bear the cost and risks associated with developing this, or have you looked to see if commercially available solutions are developing too that can help with your effort?
So we are partnering with a couple of third parties, but for the most part, at this stage, we feel like keeping it all in-house, one-stop shop, everything has such interdependency that we're putting a lot of effort internally. I think that is where we're slower than we'd like. Partnering with experts in this area is definitely something we're on the lookout for. That's where I feel like we can always look into America Makes and partners there to see where the right fit is. But we've done that. We're experimenting with that, and not enough, I would say. So we have CT scanning equipment. We have folks that are analyzing data. Data analytics is a subgroup within our additive manufacturing business unit where we're putting these efforts.
Okay. The next question is really for either Dr. Morris or Melissa. Why, and the answer may be obvious to some of us, but maybe not to everyone. Why has medical and aviation been quicker to adopt additive manufacturing for actual production compared to the auto industry?
Do you want me to take it first? Okay, yeah. Well, I think that Ellen really kind of hit it. The automotive industry really, I mean, the scale is immense, right? It's huge. I mean, when she said that low rate production is 70,000, that's pretty high. So we, satellites we build, several a year of a certain type, maybe, dozens a year of a certain type. And that fits into a really nice play for additive because we can customize each of those for the customers. I think the rate of production. On the other hand, commercial aircraft, a higher rate of production than satellite, but not as high as automotive, right? But there are still a lot of barriers there with respect to certification and qualification. And so that's, if you look in our industry of aerospace, which encompasses civil aircraft as well as space and launch and rotorcraft, the civil is harder to get into, right? Simply because of the FAA requirements, which are much more arduous than others, simply because they require more participation and observation of your data gathering and things like that. And so we're working closely with them, and we've found some nice applications. But where we've really grown most recently is in the satellite sector, and I think really the reason is because of the scale that's possible, and because of we can really prove to those regulators through our data over the past 5 or 6 years on production parts for that sector. We can prove that we're stable and repeatable. And they will accept that data, and so we're able to file parts. Yeah. So that works in that sector. Dr. Morris, did you want to continue for the medical field?
Yeah, so I think we're still at an early phase of adoption for point-of-care manufacturing. While most of the top hospitals in the country basically have some form of additive manufacturing now. We spent the last decade kind of traveling around the world trying to get people up to speed, show the value proposition. And I think one of the reasons it's really taking off is it truly improves patient care. So one of the things that Melissa said, and I think others have said on the panel, is like, you're setting out not just to do something at maybe a lower cost or less material, but you're setting out to do things that previously were impossible. So when we start with conjoined twins and we start with babies with their chest open, that have a 95% failure rate, and you're able to do something successful and then transition that into more mundane everyday surgeries and slowly find applications where it fits, and you're saying like, this not only is better outcomes, but some of it is frankly impossible without it. So some of the cases we did last week, we heard back from a surgeon who's been taking apart people's cancer in their face and head and neck for 15 years, and his response was, would have been simply impossible. We would have said no. I mean, we took out a 15-centimeter tumor in someone's chest, which is about this big. We've been turned down from 5 academic institutions that are really good that said you won't survive it. And by producing patient-specific models, having multidisciplinary teams, having the potential of having an additive manufactured sternal implant after this. It's just impossible without it. It wouldn't have been possible. So there's the wouldn't have been possible without it. There's the improvement, the stepwise innovation that's occurring with it in multiple surgical specialties. And then there is some of it, which is, oh, we can do this better, faster, lower cost. And now even our patients are coming here because they know what we do, actually asking for it. You know, we're in Rochester, Minnesota. Mayo Clinic's very blessed, I think, that we're a destination medical center. Over the last 100 years, this cornfield has turned into a place that people come from over 50 countries. You know, we see over 1 million patients per year in the middle of Southeast Minnesota. And in being from Boston, I think I can rightfully say we're not in the center of where it's going on. So people are coming here specifically for these things. But if you go to like Mayo Jacksonville, Mayo Scottsdale, you get into a really crowded, competitive marketplace where the same patient has 5 places to choose from. So if you can provide things like our ENT surgeon in Jacksonville that can differentiate himself in the marketplace and say, we're not only doing what they're doing, but we're doing it better, faster, we're using additive manufacturing, we're doing patient-specific things just for you, that really helps differentiate you in a very crowded marketplace. As far as for standard implants, companies like Stryker and people within the Stryker organization have really put their foot on the pedal over the years and have people, much like people on this panel, that have been in additive for a long time and know the value of complex osseous integration shapes that you simply cannot make without additive manufacturing. And that's true for spine cages, acetabular cups, and now more patient-specific implants like sternums and hips and, you know, the things we do for tumors. So I think at its heart, medicine is always advanced from large academic medical centers saying, how are we going to treat this patient in front of us? What are we supposed to do with this person? How can we help them? And at Mayo, the model is anything that's for the patient, the needs of the patient come before the ROI. So if they say, we have big picture thinkers here, instead of people saying, you're spending money on something that's not reimbursable, for somebody saying, will it help that patient? Are we doing what's right by that patient? And we have someone in neurosurgery, thoracic surgery saying, yes, we have to have this. It's been proven now to be beneficial. We don't, you know, it's different than a company that says, you know, what's our ROI if we do this using a concept laser versus a milling machine? You know, it's a completely different ecosystem. But as Shamil stated, these ecosystems have to be built, like the implant market. So we're doing some work with Hewlett Packard on patient-specific custom casts, braces. Yeah, additive manufacturing is one part of it, but the entire system that you're going to dump that into, where any place in the country that does prosthetics is going to have the ability to do point-of-care manufacturing, well, that ecosystem is almost more important than the system we're building, because you're changing the entire culture of how people interact with their customers. So I think it was a really good point that he made.
Yeah. So Dr. Morse, just to dovetail off from that, would you agree that the additive manufacturing supply chain, which is of course a part of the ecosystem, is underdeveloped for your industry?
I think there's a lot of room for growth. I wouldn't say it's underdeveloped, because I try not to be too much of a naysayer, because I use it all the time. And Ellen said earlier, like, does it work? I must say that like every day. You come in the morning and like, did it work? Because we have time constraints that are different, you know, which I'm sure you have on the automotive and aerospace line. I've heard the cost of like shutting a line down because a part didn't show up. It's astronomical. But if we have a patient being put to sleep and we don't have something to offer, you know, did it work becomes a really big problem. So reliability becomes an issue. And anybody that's been at it long enough knows you have more machines than you probably need, because you have to have a workforce that can run them. And in medicine, we've had to develop this ecosystem of redundancy, accuracy, a workforce of people that are called healthcare technology management experts, that bring together not only additive manufacturing, but healthcare technology, because we have to run these machines in a way that they're not necessarily designed for, under constraints that when we call the company and say this not working, it's impacting a patient care right now, right here. And like, for example, for a CT scanner, if we have a CT scanner that doesn't work, we have someone on site from Siemens, GE, getting that thing running in under 30 minutes. So we think about these machines differently. The machines can be faster, for sure. And some of the work that we've been doing with companies like NewPro. So now we're doing like complex facial trauma. We never did that before because we didn't have the speed. We couldn't get models fast enough to where if you, say, ran your ATV into a tree and your face was in 10 different pieces, they would take you, open your skin up, and put that back together. Now we do that all virtually and get to a model, and we can get a whole skull in under 2 hours. It just wasn't possible before we had reliable DLP printers that we could put through our QMS system. So I think the speed is getting better, the reliability is getting better. Biomechanical properties is something that we really need that isn't necessarily there yet, but companies are doing it, And then there's this whole concept of additive manufacturing sitting inside of a larger manufacturing ecosystem that includes robot bending of plates, milling. Additive is just one thing we do here. It's a big thing, but there are all these other manufacturing tools that could be incorporated into a kind of mega machine that can sit right next to the OR. So if a surgeon's going to take out a piece of your skull, sure, it's great. If you had a trauma 2 years ago and you got a hole, we can do that easy, make a custom plate with titanium. But if you have a tumor and we don't know how much is going to bleed, we don't know how much we're going to take, all that's unknown. But if we have the ability to then take that off, use photogrammetry or surface scanning in the OR and have something actually working while we're closing you, I mean, that would be a complete and utter game changer, but it's so futuristic. But that's when we get asked for people who don't know anything about additive manufacturing. Say, why can't you just come up and scan the hole like you scan this tumor, and then, you just make me something on the spot? You say, maybe one day. But I mean, those are the things that we're really fighting. And materials, sterilizable, bio compatible materials. There's only so many. There's only so many things that I can put inside your body and you not have a foreign body reaction to and have a significant alteration. That's why titanium's used all the time, because it's just a tried and true. It might not be the best metal for a certain application, but people are so hesitant to put something else in there because it's a real pain to go back in there and take it out, and you have significant morbidity if we do. So I think material science is going to help us a little bit as we go to biocompatible resins, titanium alloys, things that you can do in additive that you just can't do without it.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'd like to add on something that Dr. Moore said earlier about the machines being more reliable. One of the things that is really holding back the aerospace industry, I think, from scaling more broadly is the availability of machines that are really industrialized. Right now, they're sort of made, one at a time. And if you open, two of the same brand machines up, you'll see the wiring is all different, and that has an effect. And so what we really need to have is we need to demonstrate stable, repeatable processes. And that's just, we need that in one machine, right, to show that it's stable and repeatable from build to build in all aspects of the build chamber. But we also need to show stable and repeatable from one machine to the next, right? And we don't have that without significantly tweaking each of these machines to make them, reliable and similar to each other. So we really need the industry, the machine manufacturers, to make their machines in a more industrialized setting, so that will really enable scale. Right now, for example, the FAA, the first thing they're going to say is demonstrate stable, repeatable across this series of machines, and that's not an easy thing to do with the status of the machines these days. I think that's a big one.
We need stable turnkey systems too, right? Like I go buy USS printers, then I got to become an expert in bead blasting.
Yeah.
Right. I said, what bead blaster should I get? And it's all a mystery. So like,
absolutely.
I have to say like, well, what hipping machine should I get if I'm bringing in the US titanium? What bead blaster should I get? There's no turnkey solution that says this is what you should use. That Zeiss CT scanner will do this with that machine, and here's the standard. Here's the turnkey solution that we sell you. There's, oh, I got to become an expert in Wiivv, I got to become an expert in metrology. I got to go talk to all these metrology companies to figure out my QMS management system. There's just no, here's your turnkey solution. And I know it's not for medicine, and I sure as heck know it's not for any other industry, where you just say, here's a reliable, repeatable, entire turnkey solution from beginning to printing to all the post-processing to the QMS system. And it just doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Melissa.
I agree with both of them 100%. So you asked me why we're doing this all ourselves. So that whole one-stop shop model is to control all the variables, or as many variables as we can within our center. Unfortunately, when we talk about remote manufacturing, where there's a desperate need for your part that locks up your supply chain, we're not going to be able to provide a part for a machine they have and expect it to look exact or function exactly the way it did at a tech center because of this very problem. So the idea of remote manufacturing can't be realized if it requires a lot of on-site development. And if the burning need is to alleviate supply chain, there's no way machine to machine variability, if it continues to exist, that we can realize this model.
Right. That's why the OEMs really need to make their machines a little bit better, because I think there's a lot of applications where we do need to print on demand at another location, in which case, but that can't just be at any random printer, right? That has to be fully vetted and qualified, and we have to, demonstrate that it's repeatable, reliable. And then, we do have to, we'll talk about the ecosystem that Dr. Morse said. We need to develop that. For scale. I mean, right now it's probably okay for the one-offs, prototypes, low-rate production, but there's a whole industry that needs to be further developed to support scale. And for the repeatable, reliable aspects, I found in a lot of these production parts that if there are escapes, if there are flaws, if there are defects, oftentimes it happens in the post-processing. They used the wrong heat treat. They didn't read the drawing correctly on machining. Or, and so there needs to be repeatable, reliable in all of the aspects of the supply chain. And that takes work, and that needs to be created and developed. I really think.
And there's a whole education infrastructure that then has to feed this market. So if you go out and say, oh, I need a fleet of additive manufacturing machinists now because I'm going to put in 30 concept lasers or EBM machines, you're like, well, where do I go find those 30 additive manufacturing trained machinists, right? I mean, in medicine, it's even harder because we need engineers who have additive manufacturing, radiology knowledge, anatomic systems. We've had to train those people. And I think in every industry that I've interacted with, finding these people, there's only so many Ellens and Melissas and Shamis and Ajanji, there's still a need for people, and it has to be able to be all filtered down through someone who's essentially a machinist, who's following the recipe,
That's right.
I 100% agree.
Right.
So I think that part of the qualification, we need to be able to develop standards, and those standards will be different from one industry to the other as well, because there are different requirements that each industry needs, so that we can leverage this community. If you have standardized ways of producing certain things that are integrated across the whole workflow, then you can compare one to the other. And then you can start applying AI and machine learning, because you'll be able to leverage data that actually makes sense because the things have been done in a standardized way. And so I think we are approaching it in that way across all of our industries in additive manufacturing, but it takes work and it takes a lot of time.
I think one of the challenges that we're all talking about here is that most of the major users of the technology has had to come up with solutions on your own, whether they're coming up with your own company standards or post-processing. There's not a recipe, so it's trial by error to come up with the best optimum approach to put on the right surface finish or to inspect the parts or assemblies that you're creating, and which is probably why service providers and contract manufacturers have been thriving in this business, because they are more or less a one-stop shop where they've developed a lot of these processes and they provide end-to-end solutions oftentimes, but ultimately companies want to bring that capability in-house. Outsourcing is not an option for some of you. For some,
I think to kind of address one of your initial questions is all of the elements, maybe not all, many of the elements are there within the value chain, but it's just not integrated yet, especially in the automotive industry. Correct. We don't have the same experts and the same companies that we're used to dealing with in automotive within our tiers that have the expertise in all of those processes. And so to be able to integrate it all together for an end-to-end solution is really what's needed in that value chain. So those pieces are there. We just need to bring them all together. I'm sorry.
But one of the issues is, sorry for interrupting if I am. One of the issues also, Ellen, that you've probably found in the automotive industry, and I experience in aerospace, is that companies don't necessarily want to share, right? So they have a certain specification, it's theirs. They have a certain heat treat, it's theirs, and so what this happens ends up that everybody's repeating the same, work over and over, and everyone's making, thousands and thousands of coupons testing things, right? And the main beneficiary now is like the testing houses.
Well, I think that you're absolutely right, and the FDA is no different. If you go to the FDA with a medical device that you've added to manufacturing and you ask for some guidance, how should I test this? What type of metrology system do you need? What type of tolerance is allowable? There's just you tell us, and then we'll tell you if that's acceptable, even if somebody has done this 500 times. So like if you ask people from the FDA that go certify manufacturing plants, you'll say, well, what type of standards do you use? And they say, well, we make sure they're following their approval documentation. And you'll say, and that could be single device, 10 different ways of manufacturing. And I think that's where governmental agencies, academia, private-public partnerships could really help. Because they say, if we want the United States to really forge ahead and become leaders in additive manufacturing, then we have to take a little bit, and I'm a fan of capitalism, a little bit of, that competition away and produce standards that allow more people to do this in a really constructive way to say, okay, if you're making a locomotive part for a train engine, that these are the standards that you have to adhere to with these printers, with this ecosystem, with this material. And if that was publicly available, people could just follow that and the inter-machine reliability was dealt with, then more people would be in the game and then more companies could adopt it more broadly because they could trust it. Where right now, Melissa has to make people trust it, and then Shamia, and not. We all have to make each one of our vested people trust that what we're doing is actually not gonna, injure the company, injure a person.
I'll offer an example here. We started our manufacturing in San Diego, and we had guys literally from a print shop that we hired over and trained them how to use our systems, and they all became experts, and some of them have now gone on working at other companies, and that talent pool comes from businesses taking part of the burden of training people in these new capabilities. But one of the biggest decisions we made was we actually said, to meet demand and scale, we're going to actually outsource our manufacturing to another American company. And we did that. And what that enabled was us having to give up some of our know-how. It was a very interesting board discussion about, are we going to give up some of our know-how in order to be able to scale this thing? And in the footwear industry, they talk about open source. In medicine, this whole race to a vaccine, open source. There's an element here of, there's a huge tension between investment arms saying, I need you to have some secret sauce, that's why I'm investing in you. And this tension of, well, for adoption to move, you've got to take down these barriers. And I think this is going to have to come from the industry leaders. I think this is going to have to come from the larger organizations investing in companies, saying it's okay to give up a little bit in order to lift all tides.
We all benefit from that. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to say that that clearly we all, by giving up a little bit, we all benefit. The industry in general is propelled forward, right? And this is something I'm grappling with, personally, in terms of, we don't want to teach them to do this or that, but we have to look on the other hand. Isn't it good if they know how to do this or that? and for the industry. And then that really reflects back on us and our ability to, demonstrate to our regulators, that there's more confidence if we're all doing better.
Yeah, we have
right?
a quite history of doing so in the automotive industry through US Car, which is our pre-competitive collaboration among the US automakers. And so we are right now developing guidelines for standards specifically for automotive use of additive manufacturing, that highlights some of the requirements that we have that might be different from some other industries, so that we can present a unified voice to the additive manufacturing equipment manufacturers and the material suppliers and so forth. So, if we each go to them separately and say, we want you to do these hundreds of tests, and they're all slightly different, what you said, Melissa, the testing houses can benefit from that, but we can't benefit from, we can't each other benefit by accelerating the adoption. And so we very carefully choose what topics are pre-competitive that we can collaborate on to advance the technologies across all of our companies.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example, Terry, like this little surgical guide, which is just a custom osteotomy guide made with dental resin. For us to be able to prove this is biocompatible and sterilizable with 3 common sterilization methods costs $30,000 from Nelson's laboratory. And then people come here and say, show us how you do everything that you do. And you think, well, I just spent $90K on this little plastic thing, knowing that I'll get a larger return downstream. It's not publicly available information. It's IP that Mayo Clinic holds as intellectual property. But through public-private partnerships or academia, if it was acceptable to create these standards, you could say, oh, if you have this printer that's been validated through this method with this material, that this has been proven and it's repeatably, and you don't have the interprinter reliability issues, then I don't have to sit here behind Mayo Clinic and say, I can't tell you because that's intellectual property because it's not publicly available material. But if we want the industry to move forward and have every hospital in the country doing this, it has to become public information in my mind.
Yeah, and that's largely what America Makes is all about, is bringing it up so that we can all benefit from the work. Anjuki, you wanted to say something, and then after you comment, I want to get into some of the questions that we have had presented to us. So go ahead, Anjuki.
Sure. So I was touching on the IP as one thing we're starting to do, and it's really, I think, good progress since maybe a year or so ago, is involving our customers in the learning, in our journey of learning. So we see that they're participating in work groups that are drafting the standards, and we're getting indication that they understand the sensitivity around process IP that we're not willing to share, yet they want to mitigate the risk to them when we deliver a product that they will then run operations on, right? So there's a lot at stake for both, and they are starting to work around us not requiring to disclose everything, our secret sauce. Instead, they're saying, you put these controls in place and assure us that through your processes that you will produce a part repeatably, reliably, and safely. And what that program is, what that hatching strategy is, you don't have to reveal to us, and we understand that. So while that's getting addressed, the other side of the coin is, well, when you go to mainstream manufacturing and want to produce hundreds of thousands of parts, we subcontract and outsource as well. So then you're working with a third-party service parts provider that is focusing fully on additive. What are the users? We're driving as a tool in our toolbox, among many other things. So we subcontract to other vendors to produce parts, and then they can, if we share all our IP with them to reproduce a part that we've proven, then the concern is, okay, what prevents them from supplying to our competition that we very painfully developed the know-how on? So that's where we're starting to work out a way to still keep pushing forward, make that possible. Because at the end of the day, the more use cases you have, the more you produce and more you deploy, the more you will drive the technology. So we can't be stuck at this product, rapid prototyping or prototype mode in general. To go to that production, We have to produce things in volume that have been proven, and the data, the runtime data, downhole hours, whatever it is, that's what will assure our industry and our customer that, okay, over long term, it's not like this part is going to just evaporate downhole, or I keep saying downhole, but just the point is very harsh working environments.
Sure.
So I think that's where some of the barriers are. Sorry for the long comments.
No, it's a good point. So thank you. So this is our fourth game day event, and no two have been alike, but this one has been maybe even more unlike the others in the sense that we haven't addressed a single one of the questions yet that came from our audience. We promised to do that, so we will for the last 15 minutes. A couple of them, one in particular, has bubbled to the top with 10 votes from a question written by Len. Let's think about the future now, today, but then also let's think out the next few years. What new business models are emerging that have been enabled by additive manufacturing today, but then in the next few years, what now is possible that was impractical because we didn't have access to this technology or the thinking that goes with it? Any one of you?
If I may start, I think this business model has been used in other industries, but not quite as much from the OEM in automotive, and that is customization. So we've already seen, especially from the medical industry, the ability for additive manufacturing to really shine for bespoke items. And there are a lot of car customers who want to be able to personalize. The aftermarket market is huge, especially for certain vehicles, right? And we like to offer options for our customers to make their vehicles as personalized as possible, but we always run into the complexity of it. How do we tool 10 different combinations of things? But without tooling, additive can really enable that business model a lot better. We still have to deal with how you order parts and make sure that it goes onto the correct vehicle and so forth. But that really allows us to get the value and give the customers what they desire that we could not do economically before additive manufacturing. And so that's one area where we've already seen some automotive manufacturers look at. We've seen with special editions, they're not completely personalized to the customer, but they do address one customer group more so. And those are the areas that we're seeing value with additive manufacturing first in the automotive industry.
Good.
We see that too in the aerospace industry, where for commercial airplanes, there are many interior first-class cabins might be completely customized for that particular airline, or or individual even, depending on who the customer is, and with logos or lighting or all kinds of interesting panels. So additive manufacturing enables that. But I think really the biggest thing that additive manufacturing drives is the point that I said earlier, and that is the ability to create vehicles that you couldn't create before. You're able to make differentiating vehicles essentially that simply were not possible. And so you have to use additive to say, if manufacturing constraints completely aside, what's what I really need for function, right? And so this is what we can finally do. And it's really adopting that mindset, and trying to, erase the notion of designing for traditional manufacturability, but designing for function that is enabled by additive. So looking at really the end game of how much better the vehicle will be and all the value that drives, rather than part for part replacements.
Yeah, if I could add, the notion of bespoke, apologies, I'm getting a little echo here. The notion of bespoke, I completely agree with, and we built a whole business around bespoke. The thing I want to make a prediction on today is I think sustainability is going to be part of the business model that additive enables. And so if I was in the ear of a CEO of HP or 3D Systems or anywhere else, I'd go, people, investors, the new generation cares a lot about sustainability. And that's not just sustainability at the what's your product made of, but it's the entire value chain of what your product was made of. So if I don't have to ship parts from another part of the world and then get it, made in a certain place and then send to America to do that, we're going to care about that. So obviously in the world of, and this is, Terry, why I don't think cost is the number one driver of adoption. I do believe it's a major factor. But if you look at what Dr. Morris said, they just need a certain thing that works. Melissa mentioned, and both Ellen mentioned things that they can do now that was different before, and that's the driver for adopting. In our case, it was offering customization for your body and it being functional. I can absorb a few extra bucks if I can sell it for a few extra bucks, which means I'm adding value. And so when I think about the sustainability angle, the moment these materials are more sustainable, the consumer brand, is going to say, I'm going to make it with this and make that part of my story. And I think that's something that we ought to look forward to.
And I think in medicine, we're a pretty large organization and large academic centers are doing more of this, but it's still not the standard of care. If you walk into your local orthopedic surgeon or craniomaxillofacial surgeon, that he's going to say, I'm going to use 3D printing and point of care manufacturing and custom solution. It's still a little kind of in larger centers. So I think we got reimbursement codes this past year, 2019. They're category 3, which means we have a code to build to collect data for what's called the RUC. That'll be done in 3 years. We'll reevaluate. It'll get assigned a value because there's only one pot of money for medicine. And if you get something for additive manufacturing, somebody else is giving up something. There's not an ever expanding pot. So once we get value assigned category 1 codes, I think you're starting to see industry. We know the industry has been meeting with us, larger companies trying to come up with bespoke turnkey solutions, because as it gets reimbursed, we're going to need ways where someone can just buy manufacturing in a box. And we're talking about the same thing. We have the same issue in stem cell manufacturing. We have the same thing for bioprinting. You have to have somebody who's at the level of a machinist, take a little fat out of your abdomen, of which I have a lot to share, spin it down, grow your stem cells, spin them on an additive created scaffold, and it can't be like, you need a nuclear scientist to do it. It has to be a turnkey solution. So I think those turnkey solutions are happening in the next 5 years within medicine, starting in high value areas. And then point of care manufacturing will really become a reality in more sectors and not just large academic institutions. The other thing that's happening as the medical device world is clearly taking things to the next level for not bespoke, but for more customized approaches and better outcomes, like osseous integration of products. And then there is truly the bespoke industry. So there's about 5 companies working their way through the FDA right now for custom oncologic implants, where we have to take large pieces of you out and we have to put something back in. And right now we jerry-rig it with a lot of stuff. So that is certainly going to become a reality for orthopedic oncology, where custom titanium, osseous integrated implants, and then in the custom brace prosthetic world, it's going to continue to grow to where, the point of where it's broad adoption is no one's excited that it's 3D printing, right? There's no news stories that's breaking of the latest milled or stamped thing that your line came out with. So I think when you go into your local hospital and that thing spits out a custom 3D printed brace and no one's excited about it, then you've really reached adoption where the technology is invisible. And people just assume it's going to be a custom brace because, like, why, where are we? Are we back in the year 2020?
So, Terry, if really quick, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, I think construction. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that right now, where construction, additive in construction, or quick, rapid making a barracks or something like that. There's a whole world around that, which is kind of much larger scale. But I would be curious just to ask you, Terry, because I don't know, there seems to be something in the air lately around bioprinting. I've come across a tremendous amount of movement in that area. Are you seeing something abnormal off the charts at the moment, or is that just the normal, what's been happening forever?
Yeah, this might be a better question for Dr. Morris. I mean, we've been tracking it for a long time, and incremental, nothing dramatic. Still very much a research and R&D activity across many institutions, research groups, some governmental groups as well in other countries, looking at bioprinting. And I think it's, it's starting to become commercially viable. For example, Organabo has been for now probably 2-3 years doing liver tissue for testing new drugs, which I think is a beautiful application. Dr. Morse, do you have something?
Yeah, well, skin printings in clinical trials. Bone and cartilage are out of large animal trials, and we're starting human trials on nerve scaffolding but we have to start in places where you don't really need it. So we do a lot of skull-based surgery here where we have to take the nerve that innervates your face, which leaves you with a droopy face. We take nerves from other places and sew them in there, but in reality what we want is a bioprinted nerve scaffold that we can put some growth factors on, and it grows back and innervates your face. Right now it's like 2 years to even minor reinnervation. So those are going into human trials, but again, the ecosystem is incredibly important. I know Georgia Tech, I think, got a $10 million NIST grant to just think about, okay, this is going to happen. Bone, cartilage, trachea, skin. Now what? Is cells being transmitted in trucks? Well, we know that that's not good because studies have shown that cells die when they move around potholes. So like point of care manufacturing for biologics, custom pharmaceuticals, taking your stem cells and making something with it locally, whether that's locally outside the hospital, in the hospital, yet to be defined. But that's clearly going to become a reality in those bone, cartilage, trachea, skin. You get into whole organ, heart, kidney, give us a little more time.
Yeah, exactly. So we have time, but not a lot. We have about 3 minutes. And so we're going to try to take on this next question. Fortunately, we've already talked about scaling some, but let's focus in on the differences between scaling prototypes to scaling for production. And I don't know, on Junie, if you want to maybe give that a shot, maybe you can start us off, and let's try to limit this to the next 3-4 minutes if we can, and then we'll transition to the next phase of this event.
Yeah, so I think it's very much process dependent. For me, scaling prototypes, if I understood the question correctly, we're going from product iterations or design iterations to production mode. What barriers we're seeing is around cost. So we're doing a lot of good things, enabling innovation, things that we cannot do any other way. But in trying to go into production mode, many times the business case does not make sense when you look at it at a part level. So the push for us to go into production mode is faster and cheaper, more productive parts. With certain processes, it's very difficult. You have your box and you are limited to that box. So we're trying to shift and start thinking about, okay, what do we do for the parts that are challenged with cost? How do we enable fast production, go larger, because we have a whole suite of parts that we need to go big on? That's where we're starting to get into processes that are not as mature as the ones where we have some standards, some guidelines experience. So it is one of those things that if you switch lanes too much to go faster and bigger, which is what scaling is for me, then you're having to start over or take a few steps back, because now it's a new game altogether when you're talking about directed energy deposition. That's where I'm going with this. I'll stop in the interest of time. I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but I just wanted to comment on scale, what that means for our industry.
No, that's good. I think it is very different from one industry to another, obviously. So Ellen, Melissa, Shamil, Dr. Morse.
Yeah, I'll pick it up for the aerospace industry, basically. I touched on it before. I think it's really the need for the machine manufacturers to help create machines that enable repeatable, reliable, because that's necessary, absolutely necessary for scale. And then advancements in machines so that they're more productive, right? So that we don't have to wait 40 hours for a part. And that might be extra lasers. It might be a whole new technology that we're not even thinking about right now. And the last thing is really the ecosystem, the whole post-processing ecosystem. We can't forget about it. It's really essential. If we're making these parts really, really quickly, but we have a CNC machine backlog of 3 weeks, it doesn't matter if we've made a faster machine, right? So it's really about repeatable, reliable through the machines, faster capabilities, and developed ecosystem for scale.
Yeah, on our industry, I find we've actually largely solved the scale part of the equation, in terms of our reliability for our product line. And we also use certain software in the process to get the most yield out of the printers. But it's that supply chain piece. If you don't have one part in at the right time and you've got the other part, you can't ship. If your shells are late to arrive at the assembly line, you can't ship. So it's not stuff you can't solve. But largely, in that case, I would say the cost of acquiring more machines is definitely a bit of a barrier. But one thing we had to do during COVID was shut down our main production and go to a microcell again. And it was really interesting that we were able to get far more yield with the microcell than we did the first time we tried it.
Interesting.
One of the other aspects of that question in the difference between scaling for production and to make spare parts. And so I think we've touched on this many times during the panel, but in spare parts, we're really trying to reproduce, part for part. But in a lot of these cases, the benefit or the value comes from not having to inventory parts and not having to retool parts if they're for old, late models. And so the way that we design that is limited because it still needs to fit within the part function. It needs to meet many of the same types of requirements. But when we talk about scaling for production, we're not going to focus on part for part replacement. We're going to be looking at more complex systems and consolidating or integrating functions and things like that together. And so it almost becomes a little bit easier a problem because we don't have to fit into this mold that has already been defined. And the first parts that we make are actually the prototype parts, right? They're the first version, the first prototype parts that we make are the first production parts. And so we don't have to translate between, this was a prototype part, it was made with prototype tooling, and et cetera. And we have the ability to iterate and refine and optimize the design and the performance of that part throughout the qualification and validation stages. And so I think our approach when we choose to use additive for one of those applications is quite different. And we'll see more and more of the latter case as we progress the technologies, the materials, the processes, and so forth. Great,
thank you, Ellen. The clock shows about, here, 33 minutes after the hour. And so we're gonna have to bring this to a close. Great discussions, very good comments. If we would have had this discussion, say 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been focused mostly on machines and materials, right, Melissa? And
yeah,
right.
Yep.
And now we're talking about the broader ecosystem, all these other elements that are vitally important too. Not that machines and materials aren't, they are, but
Terry froze.
But
he's leaving us hanging. It's a cliffhanger.
I know. But and he left it right on end. But
you have it, jump and go to commercial.
I know.
I'm glad you touched on the spare parts and inventory. Back to the question on business models, I think digital inventory or virtual inventory is catching up very, very fast, definitely very important to us. And then repairability of parts. You're taking a part that comes back from the field and putting material only where you need it, not have to go back to the starting point. I was able to relate to what Dr. Morris said. In the end, we're trying to just put something customized for a person, but also customized for a product. Okay, this product needs just this. Let's not go back. So that's how I was able to make the connection. Those are two business models that I feel are catching on very fast.
One thing I want to see is a large investment in the ecosystem. If I were to solve HP, the government, even certain academia, I'd be putting in investments into companies that are trying to grow with additive as part of their thesis. I think, frankly, there's just a lack of appreciation for. We want to, you get the big company like a HP saying, I want to be the arms dealer, so to speak, for the whole industry. I don't want to pick a horse. But in that process of not picking a horse, a lot of these companies don't have the resources to grow at the speed they really can. And I think, I'm putting Boeing and Ford on the spot and saying, to the extent your companies could invest in the larger ecosystem.
Hey, I'll let you know that I came from Morph 3D, and Boeing has invested in that company. That's part of my connection.
That was a success.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
I just reached out to Tara. She's saying Tara is trying to refresh. So I guess with a couple of minutes, or we can wrap it.
Well, what I find interesting in all these panels that I've ever been on is there's just so much overlap in adoption, in workforce development, in reliability issues, in adoption, in end user trust of the additive manufacturing community. They're so similar across almost, it doesn't matter, aerospace, automotive, rockets, construction. It's the same question that I remember Jerry told me when he started Land Rover decades ago, trying to get an engineer to think about designing something with an SLA printer. The same problem exists 2 decades later, and it seems like we're at a good time to solve some of these issues that everybody faces. So the next version of us doesn't have to join a company and recreate the wheel, because there'll be some standards for them to follow, and we won't have conferences talking about that. Jerry, go ahead. You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know at what point I thought we lost all of you, and I was still live. So here I was going on, and
you were killing it. You're all night, like, I'm killing it.
Talking to myself here. Then I looked over at our router, and I saw some lights flashing. So it looks like I don't know what happened. We dropped off the plan here for a moment.
In the meantime, we volunteered you to go before Congress and get some more fun.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
So, right. You sold my guitar on your back wall too, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's 3D printed. Compliments of Olaf Deagle. So yeah, it's a beautiful design. So I want to thank all 5 of you for sharing your time, your wisdom, your talents, for what you're doing for the industry, and just keep up the good work. Really a privilege to know you and to work with you. So with that, I'd like to transition now out of this phase, the panel, and over to the virtual networking. So I think we have Tara and maybe Andera. Are you with us? And if so, if you would take us into the virtual network. And I hope that you can stick around for up to the next about 15 minutes. And it's a really cool experience, given that many of us cannot travel at this time. So if you can stick around, please do. So Andera and Tara, you can.
Thanks for having us, Terry.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Really
thank you. Thank you.